Hello and welcome back. The camera I'll be discussing today is the Yashica 44LM. The Yashica 44 cameras were among the large group of 127 twin lens reflex cameras shooting 4x4 images that came out in the late 1950s. Other 4x4 TLRs from that time period include cameras from Ricoh, Minolta, Sawyers, Tower, Waltz, etc., etc., etc. But why were so many nearly identical cameras introduced to the market all within a few years of one another? The answer is they were all released in response to the relatively short-lived super slide craze that lasted from the late 1950s into the early 1960s. The super slide concept was originally introduced by the German brand Rollei, and originally was a method of creating 4x4 slides from cameras that actually shot 6x6 images on 120 film. The super slide concept gained some traction, and Rollei quickly decided to resurrect the old Rolleiflex 4x4 TLR that they had produced before World War II, and they released an entirely updated version of that camera in 1957. This camera came to be known as the Baby Rolleiflex and was immediately successful as it could shoot super slide format images natively without needing to cut down 6x6 negatives. Well, the Japanese camera industry certainly took note of the success of the Baby Rolleiflex, and just a year later in 1958, both Yashica and Topcon had released their own versions of a high-quality 4x4 TLR. I'll delve into more detail about the whole super slide phenomenon in another video, and for this video we'll be focusing on the Yashica 44LM that was part of that phenomenon. So let's talk a little bit about the Yashica 44 series of cameras. The Yashica 44LM, which is what I'm shooting with today, was actually the third in the series of Yashica 44 cameras. The original Yashica 44 was introduced in 1958 and followed very shortly by the Yashica 44A and then the Yashica 44LM, which is the camera that I have. The LM stands for light meter, and as you can see there is a light meter on the top of the camera. It has the readout shown here, and then the selenium meter is behind this electrical tape. Now you may be wondering why I have the meter covered with tape. These old meters from the late 50s and early 60s were selenium, which the advantage being they required no batteries because the selenium cell itself produced an electrical current from light. The downside is as the light is being received by the selenium cell, it's slowly chemically changing the selenium. That's what produces the electric current, and as time goes by, that selenium gets used up. So my camera, the selenium cell still works, even though it is now 60 years old. So I want to preserve the function of that, and the best way to do that is simply to cover the cell to keep it from receiving any further light. Now, the Yashica 44 series is a really well-made series of cameras and a lot of fun to shoot with, especially if you enjoy shooting with twin lens reflex cameras. As you can see, it's relatively small, quite a bit smaller than a 6x6 twin lens reflex camera would be. It's got all of the full functions that you would expect from even a full-size twin lens reflex camera. So it's got the bifold hood on the top, and the hood is complete with a magnifying glass that pops up like that. Once it's in this position, you can push down the front panel, and that creates the sports finder, so-called sports finder view. On the right side of the camera is the wind knob, and to actuate this knob, you first release the automatic film stop by pushing in the center of the knob. And as you're pushing that in, you'll turn the knob. It will automatically stop it in the next frame. And then to cock the shutter, there's a separate cocking lever here. So you just push that down, it returns. Then the shutter is cocked. And to release the shutter release button is down here in the lower right corner. It uses a Copal SV shutter and has both X-Sync and M-Sync for electronic flash and flash bulb synchronization. It also has a self-timer down on the bottom. Now, as with most leaf shutter cameras of the era, you do have to make sure to set the flash synchronization lever to the X position if you are going to use the self-timer, something to do with the way the internal mechanism is designed. The flash synchronization lever has to be set to X, so something to keep in mind. The shutter and f-stop settings are with these two dials, and it's very cleverly set up so that as you're looking down on the camera, you see both the f-stop and the shutter speed, and then you adjust them with these two dials as you're shooting. And then on the left side of the camera is the focus knob. And again, everything feels just very high quality on this camera. It's a real joy to shoot with. Well, today is December 7th, and December 7th is one of the 3 127 film days of the year. And I'll be shooting this expired Macophot UP100 Plus. This film expired in 2004. I'm not sure if it's pronounced Macophot or Macophot, but it is a German brand that is no longer with us, unfortunately. So I'm interested to see how this turns out. Now, those of you who may not have seen 127 film before, it is a roll film. It's similar to 120, although it's a bit smaller. First thing to do, as always, is to remove the paper seal and make sure that you get all of the seal off so that none of these little bits of the seal end up jamming the camera. Now, to load the Yashica, first, on the bottom of the camera, simply rotate this to open. Now the supply side goes in like that, and then you push down and it snaps into place. So as I tighten this up, I just want to make sure that, again, just like any roll film, make sure it's centered on the reel, that it's not binding or bunching on one side of the reel. There we go. Now you can see it's starting to tighten up. I'm going to bring it forward until the two loading arrows are opposite these two screw heads, and then close the back. Now the way this works is there's a little red window in the back, but you only use this to line up the very first frame. I'm feeling a little resistance, so hopefully that means the film is coming into the film gate. There's a line with an arrow, so I can see the backing paper is moving, and the arrow is again telling me to continue going. Now I have a dot, another dot, another dot, and frame 1. So now, once you've lined up frame 1, close the window. That's the only time we're going to use this. Now what I need to do is tell the camera that it is set to frame 1. There's a little frame counter window here, and the way that you reset this is this silver plate here is actually a button. I'm going to push that in, and then at the same time, while I'm holding this in, move the frame counter reset button, and I'll hear that snap, and then just double check that the frame counter is at 1. Now, once it's set to frame 1, the frame counter is set to frame 1, I know the film is set to frame 1. From this point forward, the camera will automatically stop at each frame, and I should get 12 frames out of this reel, and hopefully we'll show you the results later in this video. So I'm struggling a bit today to feel very motivated to take photos. So I've stopped at this little park. You can see behind me there's still a little snow on the ground out here, and right behind me over there is a little pond. Nothing super exciting, but I'm just going to get the cameras out and see what I can do. So it's a very, very gray, overcast day, as you can see. Very low contrast. This is going to be a little bit tricky to take photos in these conditions, but I am determined to get myself out, get myself thinking, even if I don't come away with anything that I'm really happy with. Well, the good news is the film actually worked. Definitely shows some signs of age, and not necessarily in this image, but in future images that I'll show here in a second, you'll see for sure that the emulsion has developed a little bit of texture, which is actually somewhat interesting. Now, I could look at this image and say to myself, this really illustrates that I was not feeling very motivated that day. Not particularly interesting photo, but I do want to recognize that some days when you're really not feeling like you want to go out and shoot, but you do want to try to exercise your mind, just do it anyway. That's what I did in this case. I went out, I found a subject to shoot. Granted, it's not the most exciting subject, but it did at least get me thinking, and if nothing else, practicing. Thinking about composition and line and shape and form. So in that way, in that sense, I do think it was a successful day. Now, in this next shot taken at the same location, we start to really see the effects of the expired film. If you look at the sky in particular, which, if you recall, was completely flat that day, you can see texture in the sky, which has the appearance of some kind of cloud cover, but that's actually from the emulsion of the film. And many people have asked, why do I like to shoot expired film? And this illustrates one of the reasons why. Sometimes you get unexpected results, and there can be times when those results are very sympathetic to the image that you're trying to create. Of course, it's a little unpredictable, and in this case, I did not know that this was going to happen, but the results I actually really enjoy. The photo itself, again, not extremely inspired, given that I wasn't feeling that inspired that day, but I do like the results that I got from that particular expired emulsion. Now, this next image is probably my favorite image from this particular roll. Obviously not taken at the park, this was taken back at the house, and you really can see the effects of the expired film here. The numbering from the paper backing has started to bleed through into the film. You can see the 6s across there, and obviously the texture of the expired emulsion is really starting to come through. This picture I took with a flashbulb, an AG1. If you have watched my other video on flashbulbs, you'll know what an AG1 looks like. Also, I took this picture using the same Honeywell Tiltamite flash, which attaches to the side of the Yashica 44LM. And I really like this image. I like the way the dog is looking up. It's very sharp. If you look at this more closely, that the Yashica produces a very sharp image, and the film performed in a way, again, that I think is sympathetic to this subject. I know the look of expired film is not for everyone, but to my taste, I really like how this came out. So those were the 3 best photos from the Macophot roll. I did want to show a couple more photos that I've taken this year with the Yashica 44LM, just to give a sense of what it can do. It is a very sharp camera. As you can see here, double exposures are very easy. That's intentional. And it's capable of producing some really nice results. So a fun camera to use. I'll definitely be looking for more 127 film to continue shooting in 2023.